Good evening, everyone. I'm Rachel Sabino. I'm head of objects and textiles conservation here at the Art Institute, and I'm delighted to welcome you all to this evening's event. I'm always thrilled when we have the opportunity to bring conservation stories to our audiences, especially when the presenters are experts in their field and full of passion, which is the case tonight. What you're about to hear is an amazing story full of grand reveals and hidden secrets, and truly epitomizes the fruits of shared work between conservators and curators. I also happen to be the mom of a middle schooler, and so wearing that hat, I now ask you to put away your devices and silence your phones. So it gives me great pleasure now to introduce our speakers. First, Jonathan Tavares, Amy and Paul Carbone Curator in Applied Arts of Europe. Jonathan is a scholar of early modern decorative arts, arms and armor, with a doctorate from the Bard Graduate Center. He curates the arms and armor galleries in the Deering family galleries of medieval and Renaissance art, and his work spans medieval to Baroque applied arts. He has published widely on 16th century arms and armor, exploring everything from manufacture to print culture, and his IMBD credits include the Nova feature, Secrets of the Shining Knight. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge Jonathan's tremendous support of conservation. He's always been an extraordinary partner, deeply engaged, genuinely curious about the technical side of these works, and always eager to collaborate. And that keen interest and steady support make possible discoveries like the one you'll hear tonight. We're also joined by Lisa Ackerman, Associate Conservator of Objects. Lisa focuses on the conservation and restoration of wooden architectural elements, furniture, European decorative arts, and the arts of Asia, bringing a rare and invaluable skill set to our team. Wood conservation at this level requires an extraordinary combination of structural understanding, historical knowledge, and aesthetic sensitivity, and Lisa brings all that and more to our team. She originally joined the Art Institute as a 2-year project conservator to restore a late 17th century Gibbons overmantel, and we were fortunate enough to have her stay on permanently. Lisa earned her master's in art conservation from Buffalo State University, with further training in wood conservation technology in Oslo, Norway. She's held internships at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Baltimore Museum of Art, and the Brooklyn Museum, and has previous work experience at the Met, the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture, as well as in private furniture conservation firms in New York. We're incredibly lucky to have both of them here tonight. And now, without further delay, please join me in welcoming Jonathan and Lisa to the stage.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Rachel. That was very kind words to say as well. It's always a joy to work with and collaborate with conservation. And yes, it is such a thrill to have Lisa here permanently these years and making this work possible as well.
You're going to make me blush.
That's the idea. So without further ado. So I am excited this evening to be here with Lisa and talk about one of my favorite objects in the collection. This cabinet produced in Augsburg in southern Germany about 1640 to 1650. About a few years ago, we initiated a plan to rethink its display in the new Applied Arts of Europe galleries that we opened this last summer. And so it afforded us a chance to reconsider what to do with the cabinet, how best to display it, and really rethink its very fiber, its being, and talk about it with conservation, and also how best to display it so that people could get the most out of its context as best as we could. So tonight I'm hoping to first explore the context of the cabinet, to sort of figuratively as well as literally unpack the cabinet and better understand what was the purpose of such a piece of furniture and who could have owned it. So what we have here is animation of the cabinet that's going to start in a moment. Let's see here. So large table cabinets like this, called in German Tischschrank, which literally means table cabinet, or Kunstschrank, which is art cabinet, were designed to be performative, to be explored, to journey into the doors and drawers and open it to the delight of the owner or whoever was viewing it as the owner was opening it up. It's not meant to be seen static. It's sort of a kinetic art. It's meant to be used and opened up and seen, and it's meant to be sensorial. So that's a problem in a museum. So we can't actually have the cabinet open, and I don't think, Lisa, you would want us to touch the cabinet every last hour, right?
No, absolutely not. And that center area that we were just looking at, the dies are very well preserved from keeping it closed. So leaving it open, we could possibly lose that historical part of the cabinet.
Yeah, and here you can see this drawer just opens, and this is what was a writing set there. Some of the tools you see in the animation don't actually belong where they put them. Little disclaimer, this animation was made in 2012, so we are always learning more and more. And now we're going to spin around the side of the cabinet and show another portion of it. And I'm really hoping that this animation gives you a spatial understanding of the piece that is just so difficult, even in the galleries, to communicate. And so on the top right-hand side of the cabinet, we have, when this little door opens, an apothecary set that then pulls out. And you can see all the little tiny bits and pieces in there. Again, not necessarily belonging in those spots. But the little canisters you're just about to see for medicine do absolutely belong in that spot. And you see these very long drawers. And the drawers are mostly lined with this precious, beautiful silk, which is still very vibrant because it's been out of the light for so much time. And here's one of the canisters, which are empty. And then it goes back away. So the cabinet then has many complex compartments, and as seen, some of its original contents, but not all of it. So how was it used, and what evidence do we have? Well, there are some pictorial evidence, as we can see here in this mythological painting by Franken, which really is an excuse to portray an idealized cabinet or room of curiosities, rather than an actual mythological scene, which is seen. But the cabinet in the background on the table is kind of how this piece would have been experienced. And although the one that's in the painting is probably produced in Antwerp rather than Augsburg, it served a similar purpose, which is all these wonderful drawers. In this case, on the left-hand side, we have a drawer that tips out with documents, and we see sealed documents in there, so it's sort of like a filing cabinet. But then in the center compartment, probably the more precious objects, we have spilling out of one of the drawers very conspicuously jewels and jewelry. So it gives you some clues as to what would have been in the drawers. Alas, of course, there is no more jewelry left in our cabinet. Now, indeed, the grandfather of such table cabinets is this, a 16th century Spanish escritorio, or writing cabinet, itself derived from Near Eastern little portable chests with pull-out dovetail drawers, enclosing surfaces that you can write on. And I like to call this, and it says in the label in the galleries too, a Renaissance laptop. So it's basically meant to be transported on, say, like a pack mule. You take it out, you go from place to place. You open it up, you write on the surface, and you keep all your files in top. So it has that sort of similarity in a way. And these were so influential that they made their way by influence of the Habsburg court, which of course ruled Spain, but also ruled Germany, to Augsburg in southern Germany. They started making versions of these escritorio. And this is one that's today in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, which is taking that Spanish type with the dovetail pull-out drawers and the writing surface, and then adding to it, which is more of a German contribution, this fine veneer or marquetry, this pictorial convention of using different colored woods and stained woods to make these images. And this was all done, as you can see in actually this image, which is made in marquetry, in workshops like this in Augsburg. And what made this possible? Well, it is unique to southern Germany at this time, and maybe in particularly Augsburg or Nuremberg, because in those centers, these major luxury centers of production, they also had a great knowledge of metal smithing and tempering steel. And that's because of the armor industry that they had in these places. So it actually crosses both my disciplines that I study. And so they had capabilities of tempering very fine steel saw blades so that they wouldn't constantly break, and thus was the invention of the fret saw in the late 16th century. So this piece here is one of the earliest known fret saws that comes from the art cabinet or the Kunstkammer of the Dukes of Saxony, and it was probably made in Augsburg. Unfortunately, the saw blade is missing, but it is those saws that made all of this pictorial work possible by sawing the wood, and I'm sure Lisa will talk a little bit more about that later. But then spinning around back to the portion that we saw in the animation, we have here on the upper right side the apothecary set. So far beyond going to make this cabinet as just a writing cabinet, it has additional uses. And one of these uses that the Augsburg craftsmen, the Kiestlers or the furniture makers, the chest makers, added was apothecary sets. So it's kind of part writing, that writing function remains, so part writing cabinet, part apothecary grooming kit to suit a client's every needs, a noble vanity, as it were. And here we see the apothecary set, and we are really fortunate to have a number of the pieces that come from both the writing set and the apothecary set, and a little bit more of that later. But here too, you can see the drawers and that beautiful silk lining in them. Now, as a center of luxury, Augsburg was producing these cabinets and even smaller specific apothecary sets marketing them all over Europe. They were known for these kind of pieces. And the Metropolitan Museum happens to have one complete apothecary set that you see here, which dates from around 1617, so earlier than our cabinet. But what is useful about this is we can see what is missing from ours, because they kind of established a set formula for these pieces. And another important point is that they were collaborative works. They were works that were produced by the chest makers, furniture makers, also in connection with silversmiths, and even glass blowers and so many others that were producing all these bits and pieces. Unfortunately, one of the things we definitely don't have that did exist were all these little glass bottles, as well as things like, this is a cauterizer and a funnel and so many things. But what do we have? Well, to go through this photograph, it's kind of fun for me. On the upper left side, we have three tools that look like knives. They're actually pen knives for cutting your quill and for writing, so that comes from the writing set. And then next, we have some of my favorite things. This is a ear scoop and fingernail cleaner in the shape of a siren, because why not? And then next to that, we have a tongue scraper. And then after that, this is also a tongue depressor. And then this little turned ivory bowl, which is stained from use. Next, we have a part of a sundial, a hammer that I used to think was part of the medical set, and now, after studying some other cabinets, it's described in the period as being a sealing hammer. So you use the hammer to affix either wax or perhaps metallic seals on documents. So it's interesting. And then we have here the pestle that goes with the mortar from the apothecary set, a scissor, a beaker, perhaps for taking medicine, 2 sand casters for drying ink. So you cast the sand to dry the ink on writing documents. Oops, excuse me. And here, 2 strainers. And last but not least, my favorite, another favorite of all the objects, an enema syringe. So it's just the head. We're missing the body of the enema syringe. So if you were to see a complete one, it looked like this. So we only have this portion there. Now, enemas were prescribed quite a bit in the 17th century. And so we can see this print from Abraham Boss showing this process. One feels sorry for the poor woman sick in bed. And you see, so is the servant feeling sorry. But the doctor that you're seeing there is pulling out the enema syringe, has filled it, and is going to use it. And it's a much bigger one than perhaps the one that we have.
I'm going to point out that it's a lot more intimidating than the one we have or the one in the other photo.
And Lisa, you had the glory of cleaning the piece, right? Yes.
Sure did.
Anyway, it so happens that there is one cabinet that these pieces still survive, and that is these pieces belong to this cabinet, which ironically, all the pieces for the cabinet that were on the inside of the cabinet survive, but the cabinet itself does not. This was a cabinet made from between 1610 and 1617 for the Duke of Pomerania, you see seated here, Philip of Pomerania. And the cabinet, unfortunately, was destroyed in World War II. It burned. But as I said, the contents survive. And this is a picture that's idealized, of course, but these are all the craftsmen. Each one is labeled. There's a number above their heads, and there's a legend that says each of their names were involved in making this cabinet. One of the more important for our understanding here is this gentleman here is Ulrich Baumgartner, and he was the Kiesler. He was the furniture maker who made the actual structure of the cabinet, and perhaps related to our cabinet as well, which is later in date. But anyway, moving on. Who could have owned our cabinet? It's a big question. We have no provenance for the cabinet. All we know is that it was purchased from a dealer in London in 1970. That's all we know. Well, there are some clues. There was a trend for such cabinets to be purchased by various noblemen and wealthy merchants all throughout Europe. But they do particularly turn up a lot in Sweden. Like this one in Skokloster in Sweden, which was owned by this figure, Gustav Wrangel, who was not only a count but also a field marshal. Now, the Swedes had occupied Augsburg in the 1630s, in 1632. In fact, the city of Augsburg gave the king Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden one of the largest cabinets ever produced, which still survives today in Uppsala University. And then I think a lot of these field marshals followed suit in the nobles, and they bought cabinets that were fitting their size and their needs. And so we see this one very similar in Skokloster. And then another one that was in Eriksberg, another castle in Sweden. I don't know what's happened to this cabinet now, but it is extremely similar to the point that even the inlay panels are the same as ours. So I believe to think that I don't think these cabinets were actually ordered specifically all the time. They could have been made speculatively, and they used a lot of similar patterns. There aren't lots of them, but there are repetitions that we find. In fact, this is the center panel, and you can see it takes from this print, which was designed by Virgil Solus in 1569. And it's the fall of Icarus flying too close to the sun, and his father Daedalus going forward. And we can see that too in ivory on the ebony there. And then at the top, the summit of the cabinet, we have this figure of the Christian virtue of charity. which is also coming from print sources, and as well a clock. And the clock is a later addition. It probably had an earlier clock, and this is replaced when pendulums became more common in the early 18th century by a London clockmaker. And then we have here, just to point out that these cabinets really are structured like architecture in miniature. And I don't think it's any coincidence that the town hall of Augsburg here, which was completed in the 1620s, has quite an analogy to the top of the cabinet. You see here with the niches, the pilasters, and even the ears on the side. It's really quite remarkable. So it's very much what was in the air in Augsburg at the time. Now, to move forward to our story, and I apologize for all the context, but what did we do to this cabinet more recently? Well, when the cabinet came into the museum in 1970, it looked like this, what you see here on the right. It had its paw feet and all this hardware.
That's the left.
The left, oh, sorry. Yeah. My right, sorry. But it came in and it was missing, it had all this hardware and these feet. But then they decided, the curators and also a restorer, that all this hardware was not appropriate and the feet were not appropriate and they must be modern and they must all come off. So by 1972, everything was, all those pieces were removed and thankfully put in storage. And this is what I saw. So I saw these multiple times over the years in storage. Around 2019, more particularly, I was paying attention to it. And it always grabbed me. I was wondering, what's wrong with this? Is it really modern? I looked at the files to see what the story was. And then none of the contents of the drawers were ever put out either, which, you know, we have it. Why don't we put it out? And that was a plan I had in the back of my head. And then further on, I visited a committee member for our visiting committee, for our committee for Applied Arts of Europe in Paris, and he happened to have a smaller Augsburg cabinet. And then I was dumbstruck because it had identical hardware on it. And I said, there's nothing wrong with this hardware, it's period. They took it all off, oh no. Then we got to planning, and I said, Lisa, can we fix this? And just to dive a little bit deeper in the cabinet, you saw in the animation, this is the center section with this beautiful marquetry which has the 4 elements, and each element is a profession. The one in the middle is a baker for fire. The one on the other side is the farmer for earth, and the one with the falconer is for air, and then there's another one for fishing, which is water. And those two come from print sources like this, as you see here, the baker. And these two are found in a number of different cabinets, but onto what Lisa had to do, which was to conserve these pieces. And as we were doing this, there were some things that were revealed to us. So please, Lisa. Here we go. And when you take out the sleeve of those figures, so basically it's a box that you saw clamped up. Lisa had clamped it up because it was warped. When you pull it out, this is what you find, hidden drawers. And there was no mention of these drawers in the files. People might have known about them, but it was a thrill for me to find these drawers and pull them out. Again, all of them empty. But
yeah, they're extremely tiny and tiny, tiny little drawer pulls as well. Okay, so we have maybe you want to talk about the stamp that's here as well?
Sure. So the cabinet is veneered in actual ebony from Mauritius. In 1625, there was a guild regulation that to prevent forgery or faking of the veneer, and it was extremely expensive to have African ebony brought to Augsburg and used as a veneer on the cabinet, but it was easily faked. So to prevent the faking of it, they had to present it to the jury of the guild, and they would pronounce it as authentic ebony and strike it in a conspicuous spot with a stamp that says Ebony, which you're seeing here, and the pine cone, which is the symbol of Augsburg, to show to the consumer that they were buying authentic ebony.
Okay, so to continue on about ebony, the island of Mauritius was a key source for ebony back in the 17th century, and here you see it on the map, and you can see a typical forest on this island. So the ebony grows in these thick, lush forests, and it grows very slowly, so that creates a very, very dense and heavy wood. And it can range anywhere from like a dark brown all the way to jet black. And it's because it's so dense, it's very easy to give it a nice polish without actually putting a coating on it. So it was very, very much in demand for furniture industry. I think we all know that it's used for piano keys. It was really, really heavily in demand and very, very valuable. So here we're looking at how the veneers would have been made. They would take, this is called a frame saw, and the frame saw would like kind of slice through the logs in order to make like thin sheets that could be then adhered to surfaces as veneer. And then when it comes to actually assembling these inlays, did you ever wonder how they fit so well together? There's not big gaps between. That's because of the economic use, they would want to cut both the positive side and the negative at the same time. And that would be done with the fret saw, which again, going back to this picture, you can see there's a number of them as well as frame saws on the wall. But to keep everything in alignment, they would create a little packet. And like in the case of ours, it would probably just be a piece of ebony and a piece of ivory, and they would cut the positive and negative at the same time in a packet that would be held in place using one of these Chevalier de Marquetry, which is a bench. It literally translates to marquetry easel. And a lot of people at the time referred to it as a donkey because it was a bench that you could sit on, and it has a foot pedal that then controls the clamp, like a jaw that would hold your packet in place, and that frees up both of your hands to be able to do very precise cutting. And that helped to avoid waste. So whenever there's a piece of furniture that has a lot of veneer on it, the veneers are generally glued down with a hide glue or a protein-based glue, and over time, those tend to break down. They can be very vulnerable to temperature and humidity changes, just as the wood can be. So the first thing that I would do on a piece like this is to go around and check all of the veneer to make sure that there's no movement in it. And when there is movement, then I have to very carefully introduce glue back underneath the veneer, and then it takes a lot of clamping and sometimes some very creative clamping. So here's some more clamping. And yeah, that door was fun to clamp because it was veneer that was actually on the arch that needed to be set in place. So the corners worked well as well as the straight edges. And yet more clamping. And there was a lot more that I'm not going to show because we'd be here all night.
I want to ask some questions, Lisa. So all of this ebony is on top of what woods?
Well, in this case, I mean, the ebony is so valuable that they would build the carcass out of something like pine. I think in this case, we've got deal underneath our ebony. Yeah.
And I thought I saw some oak too, right, in some places. And
There's
some
oak
wood.
in some of the drawers. I think the drawer bodies are made of oak. Yeah.
And so would they shrink or expand and contract in different ways, the different species?
They can, yeah.
And that causes some of the cracks.
Yeah, and some of the cracks that we see in the veneer that's over the surface is actually caused by the movement of the deal underneath. So when that moves, and whatever is attached to it has to move with it. And depending on how much it moves, it could lead to splits or cracks. Yeah. So moving on to our other very valuable material, ivory. This primarily comes from the tusks of elephants, but there are also some mammoth ivories and some walrus ivories out there. But here I wanted to give you an illustration of the actual tusk in place, and you can see that there's a pulp canal, and that's living material, living fleshy material. That's where you find your nerves and your blood vessels. It's very similar to the root of one of our teeth, and that's also where it produces dentin, and the dentin is what forms the outer hard ivory that we're familiar with seeing. And then as the dentin produces more growth in the tusk, we get these really cool growth patterns that kind of look like stacked chevron shapes, which you can see up there. It's highlighted as they're known as Schrager lines, and that's in this example here, we can see in one of the feet that we've lost the pulp canal, but we do also have a very great example of the chevron line, or the Schrager lines. So I thought I would go through the 4 feet since they were removed and show you the different levels of condition. Starting with this one, which is actually in the best condition. And you can see here that there's a steel spike that comes up through the bottom. So the hole would have been drilled through to insert the spike. And then, what did you say? The spike ends up being like a foot pad.
Yeah, foot pad for the furniture.
For the...
I find it very shocking. You have this delicate material, this ivory, which is dense and beautiful, but it's attached by this big hand-wrought spike that runs through it. And but it's very functional. It makes sense, and it makes sense for the period. I just can't imagine, boring the hole in both the piece of furniture and the foot, or using the pulp cavity, but then hammering this thing into the hole to get it in place.
Yeah. Well, I had to do that to put it back on.
You did, didn't you? I wasn't there for that part.
Yeah, so on this one, you can see that there's also this little nub sticking out behind the spike. And what that was put there for was to prevent, like the spike goes really deep in, and then the little nub has a hole that it fits into, so it locks the foot in place so it's not going to rotate. And so I think originally all 4 would have had it made out of the, carved out of the ivory. But as you can see here, this one is a wood dowel that was inserted. So we know that there had been some treatment on it.
Some earlier campaign.
Yeah, before the feet were taken off, because this wasn't done here. So this one, they put in a wood dowel just to replace the ivory one. But the rest of the foot is in pretty good condition. Note the yellowing of the ivory. It's not looking as nice as it does now. And then this one you can see had lost the pulp canal. So the whole thing was filled actually very well with a piece of wood, and they carved that little pin out of the wood. And this is, it's important to have it there because it helps to stabilize the metal spike that's going through, as well as lend support to the structure of the foot. And then this was our worst one, which is missing the pulp canal. It's missing, the spike couldn't stay in because of the fact that it was missing the pulp canal. It's in really bad condition as far as some cracks going through it. So we've kind of had a back and forth on this and talked about the damages possibly being from the way it was removed in the first place from the cabinet. Because with that hollow structure, if the spike was going through there, if they didn't know that, they could be wiggling it around. And you'll notice in this next photo here, especially up here, wrong one. Up here at the top, you'll see that there's a previous repair, which in this one, I had taken it off so that I could clean it up and have it look better. And this is a nice example also of removing the yellowing. by doing a very strong hydrogen peroxide poulticing on the surface, as well as then letting it sit in the windowsill.
Like cleaning your teeth with hydrogen peroxide. Huh?
Exactly. And then, I mean, it's Denton. Just why not? So then, the feet were left because I wasn't immediately diving into the rest of the project, so the feet had time to sit in the windowsill and have some UV light bleaching.
Yeah, it sat in your window for quite some time.
Quite some time.
And it's kind of scary how well that works.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought about creating a UV box to put them in, but I didn't need it. So here we can see that foot kind of in profile, before cleaning. And then I also had to create a new wood fill for the inside the pulp canal, and then also create the new pin that would keep it from rotating. But here you can see that the spike that comes up through the center is a little bit bent out of shape as well, which also kind of clues us into the fact that it was a little brutally removed. Takes a lot to bend something like that, but thankfully I could work with our mount maker, and we worked to straighten it out a bit so that it would actually go back up into the underside of the cabinet without any major problems. And so then putting them back was trial and error, and somebody referred to this photo as getting under the hood. So it was trial and error because each of the spikes sat in each of the feet a little bit differently. So it was a matter of trying which one fit the best, and going from there. However, this one was nice and easy because it's obviously the one that has the wooden peg, the dowel put in. And here in the first image on the left, you can see all of the adhesive that they also put on to try to hold this one in place. So that was cleaned off, and then I had to drill out the peg that was on the underside and drill out the peg that was in the foot, and then put a new one, and that would span between the bottom of the foot and the ivory foot. So another aspect of ivory that I had to work on was this, what appeared to be like a decorative apron coming off the front underside. So one of the things that I would also do at the beginning, looking at an object of furniture like this, is to just check like any of the joinery to make sure that it's not showing any movement, that everything is nice and snug and stable. And this, because it would just be an edge join, just edge to edge, those are generally the weakest, so I was playing with that to make sure that it didn't have any movement. There's another one on the back as well. And there are also sort of these decorative wings that flank both sides of each foot. So moving this one led to the discovery that it was actually a drawer that we didn't know about.
There was absolutely no record of this ever being known as a drawer.
And
I'm
if you
certain
remember,
that nobody knew this.
even in the illustration, they don't show it because they didn't know that it opened. So that was a fun discovery. And
We keep the keys in there now.
we do. And then, like this one, you can, well, maybe you can't tell from this, but like the very lower tip of it is missing sort of like an inverted fleur-de-lis decoration that would have been in ivory. So by comparing it to the one on the back, I was able to make a small drawing, a tracing of it, and then cut it out with a fret saw, and then do enough of a quality engraving to make a close replica of the one that was on the back.
It was perfect.
It's not perfect, but thank you. So there it is, just from a different angle. So after dealing with the ebony and the ivory, there was still the metal components that needed to go back on. So here's just some of them. And some of the problems they had were that they were quite dirty. They'd been sitting in storage for a long time. They probably weren't cleaned when they were taken off of the cabinet. So there's dirt and grime, and then some of them were also showing some significant corrosion. So long story short, here's just a couple of them that were cleaned up prior to putting them back on.
And they're all made out of sheet brass that was cut, and we'll see this from the process that you corrected, but they seem to be formulaic, and they're found on many different cabinets. I've been looking and researching now, and I guess they just thought they were they're not like works of art in their own right, they're just part of the whole, and I think in 1970 they just thought they were too much. So they said they must be wrong and they must go. But honestly, in this period, they like a little bit of gold here and there, and I'm glad that you were able to reinstate them.
A little flare. Well, and I don't understand how these could be too much when you look at, if you look really closely at all of the like sort of designs that are in the ivory that's inlaid.
It's in keeping completely. Yeah.
It's super busy, so this to me makes perfect sense. So I'm going to move on to one of the most fun repairs that I had to do that Jonathan was just mentioning. So this is the bonnet that goes over the bell on the clock. So when I took that off, we can see on this side here, there's this pierced fretwork that's missing a big piece, and it also has a little bit of a repair that's not that well done, but also take note of the red textile that's behind it. Well, I'll talk about that in a minute. So when I took it off, the only way to really deal with it was to take it off because the textile behind it is just way too fragile to work around. And you can see here the really weird looking flower that they put in place, and then looking at the back of it, you can see that it's just kind of adhered in place. There's way more metal there than they need for that little flower and one little decorative piece. But anyway, so I continued in order to clean all of them, I took them all off. And here is a comparable example, which again, I could take a tracing of the existing design and then do my best to reproduce it, which you can see here. This is my reproduction that's put into place. And what I did was use brass that was like slightly thicker than the original, so that I could then file down the overlaps and kind of create a lap join so that the out-facing surface actually is flush with the original. And then going back to note the textile here, the fretwork was really only half the problem. We see that the textile is super faded, and then the textile is torn. And then the level of fading becomes even more evident when you look at it from the inside. The red has really, it almost appeared like kind of yellowish. So I'm not an expert in textiles, so I had to turn to Isaac Facio, who's here in the audience tonight. He's one of our very talented and knowledgeable textile conservators. And when we approach any kind of a treatment, we generally will try to start with the least invasive as our first option. And so Isaac, his advice was to insert dyed silk crepeline, which you can see he's working on the table. And it's quite translucent. And here he is gently tucking a piece of the crepeline into the front between the textile and the window. And then he gently put in a couple tiny stitches to help hold it in place. And here you can see that it makes a world of difference with the tone. And it really even helps to sort of hide the tear that's in the textile. And then when you add in the metal fretwork, you don't even see that it's torn behind, but you do see the redness again.
And we don't see this in the gallery, do we, this panel?
No, I moved it from the side to the back, thinking that it's with the replacement, let's put it on the back. So the one that you actually do see on the side is not the one that it doesn't show my handiwork. Maybe one day it'll be seen in the round again, and that's when you'll see it.
You get to see it today on the screen.
Yeah, so another hidden secret. So this is just a little diagram of the steps that I took. And then
Yes.
the bales. So these were the last of the metal components that had to be returned to the cabinet. And this would take another collaboration with our mount maker, Andy Talley. Thank God for him. So you can see here that just like one look at the existing mounts tells you that they weren't gently removed at all.
It's brutal.
It's very brutal. So these cotter pin attachments would have been inserted from the exterior through a hole, and then the pins would have been bent like at a 45-degree vertically and then pounded into the wood so that they would allow the drawer to have room to pass.
We generally call this clinched pin hinges because it's clinching into the
Yeah.
wood on the other end.
And here, this is a view of the inside through where the drawers would have been sitting. You get to see the interior, the deal wood of the cabinet. And the top photo shows the plugs still in place, but the bottom photo is with the plugs removed. But I really just wanted to show both of these because you can see that these would have had to have been dug out of the wood, and it looks like they were dug out with like a chisel. And then, as we saw in the previous image, some of these were broken off. There's even one that's like cut in half at the ring. So this wasn't a gentle process at all.
There is notes in the files from the restorer in 1972 talking about how marred the surface was, but claiming actually that it must have been from when the bales were put in a modern time, not from what he had done. So you can almost read between the lines like an apology for, I don't know what happened here, but this is very much a period form of putting in hardware, to have these pins that come in and then clinch over. And any restorer today, I would think, would notice this and say, this is actually period, we shouldn't touch this. So it's kind of a shock, but we all reevaluate over time. I'm sure we do things we're not supposed to do now that people will say in 10 years.
Hindsight.
Yeah.
So when they removed these, what they would have done is, as you can see in the top interior photo, they put like a wooden plug in, and then they would have like recreated the veneer on the exterior to continue the ivory design inlaid in the ebony. So the next step for me was to find where they had replaced those veneers and remove them to open the holes back up so that we could easily put new pins through. So if you look closely here, you can see some lines, some seams. And again, this would have been put on with a protein glue, which is water soluble. So I could use a little bit of water to loosen them up and pop them off. And then that's the side panel with the two holes exposed again. But because those pins were so badly damaged, I needed to turn to our mount maker, who fabricated new pins for me that actually didn't require the cotter pin sort of shape to be bent up.
We weren't going to use these to pick up the cabinet and move it anymore. So.
But I think even you could with these, because here you see in the first picture at the top, you've got the steel was pounded into shape, and then in the middle photo, that's when after they were soldered, and then in the photo to the right, he actually turned them on a lathe to file them down so that we were sure that we had the right circumference, and it was perfectly round and would fit through the hole no problem. And at the bottom, you can see the last step, he actually threaded from the bottom so that you can now put a screw in through the bottom, and then it could be held in place using a washer. So it's all nice and flat. There's no way that we would have been able to put a cotter pin through, bend it appropriately, and get it to fit into the gouges that were already there, because I wouldn't make new ones. So here it is after we did a nice fitting and we knew that everything worked. Then it was time to clean up the bale and tone the mounts. And that included putting little specks of gold on it to kind of mimic the gold that remained on the bales. So this is a straight-on view and a side view.
It's scary how good you are to match that.
Thank you.
I can't tell the difference.
Thank you. And so then Andy was also involved in the very last step, which before we could call this project finished, we wanted to make sure that we were going to create a mount that could take the pressure off the feet, because as you remember, there was one that was really cracked and broken. So we figured with the age and with the previous damages, it'd be best not to put the full weight of the cabinet on them. So Andy also crawled underneath, and he came out with this really ingenious method of creating this mount that it avoided the drawer channel at the front. It took the weight off of the ivory feet, and then he also included some adjustable feet so that once it was in place, we could level it. And this ended up also acting as a protection underneath for the forklift when we had to put a forklift to lift it to then push it forward into the case, because the case design didn't leave us all that much space to put it in other than straight in. So here we have it like in its fitted stage without any padding, and then once we knew that it was good to go, he added some protective padding, and then there's just a detail of the adjustable foot.
And we had a few meetings about where that foot would be so that you couldn't see it when you see it in the gallery. So it hovers, but you don't know that it's hovering. Or at least we hope that you don't know that it's hovering.
Yes, it's a very fine space underneath them. So I thought I would just quickly give a run through, highlighting the before and after changes. So here, the astragal and the escutcheons on all of these locks were put back on.
And I should say, too, the lion paw feet are unique to this cabinet. I don't know of another Augsburg cabinet that has lion paw feet like this, and I haven't seen another one. Usually they're little bun feet, and there are some that have some animals in cast metal, but this seems to be unique, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah, and this also highlights the small ivory piece at the bottom. And then with the cabinet doors open, it's the decorative parts that were torn off these hinges were reapplied. Some of these metal pieces also needed to be straightened as well as cleaned. This is the interior door where the lock plate and the hinges were given a little upgrade there. And then from the side here, you can see the fretwork as well as the decorative hinges were replaced. And then there's something that we decided not to do, so we thought we would fill you in on that. In the box full of pieces that were taken off, there was this extra drawer pull, and there was some discussion of putting it back on. The only place that we knew that it came from was from this circular design that actually is on a drawer, even though it's kind of a hidden drawer. So it's got this beautifully etched or engraved depiction of a falconer on horseback. And it has two holes in it where the prongs on the back of the lion head drawer pull would have fit in. And that it was removed.
And that was removed in 1972.
Yeah, and it was very well restored. I can go to this image here, and you can barely tell where they were. And the first thought was to put it back, but then after some some debate about it. I decided that I would cut out the shape of the lion and put it in place and say, does this make any sense? Which it doesn't. Why would you have such a beautiful engraving and then cover it up where all you see is like the horse head and tail? Yeah.
And in that space, also, could you go back one? I'm sorry. That spot is a drawer. So that's a hidden drawer, that section. And it's possible that when this cabinet was restored at an earlier time, that they added this lion head pull to be like the other drawers. But we noticed that there was a difference between this lion head and the other ones. It looked like it was cast after the other ones. It didn't have quite as much detail. So ultimately, we said, well, maybe we shouldn't put this one back.
Yeah, when you're looking at it, you can see like the details and the lines of it are much softer than when you compare it to the ones that are still in place on the drawers. And the only thing that I was going to say also is that it makes a little bit of sense just in the alignment.
Symmetry.
That it would be right above another one, but it doesn't make any sense to cover up that beautifully etched ivory.
It's also an anomaly from the other cabinets I know that have this formula. So anyway.
Yeah. We also, in the 70s, there was some talk about replacing one of the heads on the figure on top, and the decision was made not to do that.
Yes, we could have came up with you might have remembered the figure of Charity has, the child is unfortunately missing its head, which doesn't bother me anymore. It used to, but I don't see it anymore. But we were thinking, you could 3D print it off of one of the other heads on the cabinet, but we didn't do that. So it's a little bit more honest. It's old, so. Yeah,
a cabinet of this age would never be perfect. But plus in conservation, we try not to take the artistic liberties of creating something when we don't know exactly what it would have looked like. So when I did the fretwork and the ivory replacement, I had something to compare it to, and I was confident that that's what it would have looked like.
It would have been going too far, yeah.
Yeah, so we decided not to do that one either. Yeah, and then the other thing that didn't make sense is that all of the other drawers where the lion heads are, it's just a simple black background encircled with the ivory.
Yeah, it anticipated that hardware.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So here's just a quick photo of the forklift actually putting the cabinet into place, and Jonathan positioning some of the tools.
It's one of the great moments in my job when I get to play with the pieces and put out this trail of objects in front. And it was happiness for me to see these objects finally displayed with the cabinet that they come out of. And it's unique for a lot of collections that do have Augsburg cabinets that they don't actually have any of the contents, and we do. So I wanted to make sure that was out there and seen. But it is harrowing to see this thing lifted up on forklift. And also the anachronism of that, this 17th century cabinet on a forklift going into the case. But anyway, it was done, and now it's out.
Yeah, it took a whole group of people to make this project complete.
Thank you.
So that's all we have for you. We're kind of at time, but if you're willing to stick around, we do have time for questions.
Yep. So if you have any questions, just raise your hand and someone will come with a microphone. And we'll try to repeat the question, of course.
All right, we've got a question right here. Hi, I was just wondering how long this whole process took.
That's a great question.
That is a great question. I really wish that I would have kept precise time on it, because this was done with the renovation of the Applied Arts of Europe galleries taking place. So there was multiple things going on at once. And I think at one point, after the cabinet was delivered, there was like a straight month where I was doing something else and I couldn't get back to it. So I had it and was working on it for about a year, but a year wasn't fully
You were doing other
focused
things
on it. Yeah.
Immediately. But yeah, for a year it was down in that space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Got another one right here.
Hi. Yes, in terms of usage, were there ever like documentation or inventories or indexes? Like, would people lose where things were, or how would they track the items inside the contents of the drawers? Like,
Historically?
yes.
Oh, so that's a great question. So we do have some excellent documentation for the Pomeranian cabinet, for the Duke of Pomerania, because the merchant who put that together and several other cabinets, Philip Heinhofer, who was a silk merchant who became sort of a diplomat, also kind of a spy, and many other hats that he held. He was one of these great impresarios who brought together all these different craftsmen to make these things, and he's like the leader in all of this. And he actually made notes for the Duke that survive of what is where and what they are and how to use them. So for that cabinet, that's an incredible resource. And there are other cabinets, too, that have similar resources. He did another one for the Duke of Saxony that is almost complete as a cabinet, too, and it was a cabinet table, that particular one. And that survives, of course, on view in Dresden. And there, too, you have the pieces still in their respective spots. And one of the things I haven't been able to do just yet, and I would like to do this, is to look at the organization of the cutouts in the drawers and where the implements sat and compare those to some of these other cabinets. But there is a couple of decades difference in this piece that we have in those as well. So there's change that would happen, and also the apothecary sets too. And every cabinet must have been slightly different and unique, but there is some formula here too, I think. To some degree. I hope that answers your question. There are a lot of things that help us, give us clues, but we're lucky to have some of the things nonetheless. Yes?
Making my way to the front.
Just a quick question about the lion's head with that kind of hidden drawer. If there's no sort of drawer pull on the drawer, how would they open it?
Yeah, you can grab the architectural, the little ears on the side and the pediment, and it's an easy grab, and it pulls right out.
But for the one without the lion's head?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's what,
you grab
it's kind of got
pediment.
a three-dimensional front that you can grab and pull.
Gotcha.
And it opens fairly smoothly.
Yeah.
It's another one of these plays with what's a drawer, what's not a drawer, and other cabinets do this as well. Any other questions?
And we'll take one more question.
Yep.
Maybe you talked about this, but I might have missed it. How did the Art Institute come to acquire this piece?
It's not a deep story, unfortunately. All that I can tell from our files, and thanks to our collections manager who's seated just behind you, who helped me just earlier about this. It came from a dealer in 1970 from London. It was bought with anonymous purchase funds, and that's it. And that's all we know. Of course, we know who the purchase funds were for, but it is anonymous, and here we have it. And we're very lucky to have it. It is one of the greatest pieces of Augsburg furniture, Augsburg cabinets in this country. There's also a wonderful one in the Getty that's slightly earlier. So
That concludes our program. Thank you, Jonathan and
Thank you.
Lisa.
Thank you.